If you're a fan of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, then you might want to buckle up because this list and these scores are about to make you real mad. This is a bloodbath. Well, all right, let's see if I agree with how Rotten Tomatoes ranks the entire The Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. All right, so this ranking will be sorted by the lowest tomato meter score to the highest tomato meter score. So how does Rotten Tomatoes rank the entire The Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise? Well, coming in at number 9 and in last place is going to be Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 from 1990 with a 13% tomato meter score and a 30% audience score. So there's actually no critics' consensus for this movie. So we'll go ahead and read 2 critic reviews instead. The first one said this movie was rotten, and they said, for those who saw the first 2 massacres, this will seem pretty much deja vu. Okay. The next critic said, Leatherface was actually fresh. They said, screw you, critics. This movie is fresh, in my opinion. They said, taken as a separate entity, this is a competently packaged horror movie that plays by the rules and delivers what the title promises. Sadistic killers, whimpering victims, and chainsaws. I mean, Leatherface gets his golden chainsaw in this movie and doesn't even kill anyone with it. Like, come on now. But, I can't completely fault the director, Jeff Burr, or the rest of the team behind Texas Chainsaw 3, just because, the MPAA killed this movie. This movie was so censored and so chopped up. This was during an era in 1990 where the censors were really going hard on these type of movies, and it was just bad timing. I think if this movie maybe was released earlier, in the early 80s, mid 80s, or even late in the 90s, maybe, or 2000s. Definitely in the 2000s. I think that would have elevated this movie. So bad timing. It would have been bloodier. We would have seen more cool shit. I will say though, the final girl in this movie, Michelle, my least favorite final girl in the franchise. Also, her boyfriend Ryan, who survives way too damn long, in my opinion, in this movie, is pretty much a douche. Yep, pretty much. A completely unlikable character who's annoying all around. But yeah, this movie was a mess. New Line fired and then rehired the director, Jeff Burr, because they just couldn't really find anyone else to make this movie. And then at the end of the movie, they filmed an entirely new ending to the movie without even the director knowing about it. And Jeff Burr was like, you know what? I'm sick of this shit. Get my name off the movie. You can release it, whatever, obviously. Just get my name off the movie. He was so pissed. But, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, there's some decently okay things here. We got Viggo Mortensen in the movie, which is, he's fine in this movie. But it's, overall, it's a pretty bad movie. It's a pretty bad horror movie overall. It's definitely let down, not bloody, not scary. This is not a great Leatherface by any means. Not the worst Leatherface in the franchise, but not great. Would I agree with this movie being in last place? Yeah, I would agree. This movie is last place on my ranking for the franchise. So, yep, there you go. Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, coming in on last place, according to Rotten Tomatoes. All right, up next at number 8 is actually probably going to surprise some people, but it's going to be The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning from 2006, with a 15% tomato meter score and a 53% audience score. So a huge difference there. Obviously, the critics don't like this movie at all, but the audience kind of digs it. You know what I mean? Much bigger audience score than the movie we just talked about. Yeah, so the critics' consensus for The Beginning goes like this. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning, is full of blood and gore, but not enough scares or coherent story to make for a successful horror film. So yeah, this is the prequel to the remake from 2003. This movie is made by Platinum Dunes again, so it's competently made overall. Overall, the movie looks good. Just technically, the movie is pretty good overall. You can't really complain, in my opinion, too much about that. Just to me, I don't mind the look and just overall how the movie's made. This movie, though, to me is just too generic in so many different ways, and I know that was kind of typical for 2006. We were getting a lot of generic movies with just a ton of gore just thrown in for that shock value without much thought or process put into the writing. Though, I do think there's a bit of thought process put into the writing of this movie. They try to answer some questions. It being a prequel, they try to answer obviously the question about, how Leatherface came to be, blah, 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 blah. But I think in this movie, there's a lot of things that we get answers to that I wasn't asking for. Like, oh, how did Arlie Ermy lose his teeth? Speaking of Arlie Ermy, he's pretty fun in this movie. I think he does, once again, a good job. I mean, he's kind of a legend, as an actor. And, he's fun in this movie. I will say, though, like, again, we get Andrew Brzezinski coming back as Leatherface in this movie, which is just a big, menacing, scary Leatherface in the franchise that I enjoy. I have a good time with. He's pretty damn good in this movie. And I will say, with the beginning, I mean, they have it ranked 8th, second to last on this list. This is not my favorite movie in the franchise by any means, but it's a scarier movie than most of the movies in this franchise, I would say, without a doubt. But not a great movie. It's kind of boring. It's kind of cliche. Like I said, it's one of those movies. I mean, the guy, the biker, Nickelback looking guy who gets killed, that's a fun kill, but most of the kills in this movie are just super bloody, just for shock value. They're just not really that interesting. And the movie's just not really that interesting to me. I would disagree, though, with it being number 8. I would have it a couple spots higher on my personal list, which I do have out there. So, yeah, I would have it higher, but there you go. According to Rotten Tomatoes, they have The Beginning listed at number 8 in the franchise. Coming in hot at number 7 is going to be Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Next Generation, or you could call it The Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1994. We'll talk about why. There's 2 titles in just a second. But this came in with a 16% tomato meter score and an 18% audience score. So a way lower audience score than the movie The Beginning we just talked about, which had 53%. So yeah, this movie, I mean, we haven't even broken 20% yet, and we're 3 movies in. But the critics' consensus for The Next Generation goes like this. The Next Generation has the fortune of starring early career Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger, but it services neither headliner well in a convoluted and cheap-looking slasher that doesn't live up to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre legacy. I mean, of course, yes. I mean, this movie does not quite live up to the legacy of the OG, obviously. And yeah, I mean, this movie's weird because it has the 2 most famous people, arguably, in the entire franchise in one movie. And it ends up being still one of the movies that is widely considered one of the shittiest movies in the franchise. I mean, yeah, there's some fun things here, though. It's not a completely unwatchable movie. You've got like the character Barry, who says some ridiculous things that are kind of funny at times, You get the whole aspect of like we're following these kids after prom. But yeah, I mean, I think Matthew McConaughey as like the guy who drives the tow truck, who is one of the villains. I mean, he does a great job in this movie. One of the best characters in the franchise, in my opinion. And obviously this was before he became a massive star. This was like his first big role he ever got. He was actually on his way to Hollywood, then ended up just kind of auditioning by happenstance for this role and ended up getting it. The director was like, oh shit, that was actually pretty good, so let's do it. So yeah, he's good in this movie. Renee Zellweger, actually one of the best final girls in this franchise, definitely. I mean, obviously a great actress who's done a lot of great things. She's actually like very athletic. There's a moment in this movie where she's running from Leatherface and you're just like, damn, she is fast as shit. Yeah, so there's 2 titles to this movie, like I said. And part of that was because this movie was re-released after Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger started to kind of gain some fans, of course. They tried to kind of, make some money off of that, change the title, edit the movie down a little bit, but it didn't work. This movie was a massive failure. Did not make very much money at all. And a big reason why, in my opinion, is because Leatherface in this movie is terrible. Just terrible. Leatherface spends way too much time screaming and whining in this movie. It just grates on you. And the masks in this movie also for Leatherface, not very good at all to me. Okay, so this movie's directed by Kim Henkel. And Kim Henkel has openly said he was not really even a big fan of the original. But yet he was hired to kind of recapture the spirit of the original, a movie that he doesn't even like. That was a weird choice as a director. Of course, in this movie, though, you get the whole Illuminati secret society subplot. The guy comes out waltzing out with like the 57 nipple piercings, you know what I mean? But so you get that whole thing, which is kind of fun, right? That's kind of interesting, right? That they're all behind all this stuff and whatnot. But this movie's all over the place. It's not as generic as maybe like The Beginning or Texas Chainsaw 3 that are just kind of like, they're just kind of generic in a lot of ways. This movie takes some swings, but it's not a very good movie. I actually have this movie as number 8 on my personal list, so I would disagree at number 7, but very close regardless. So there you go. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Next Generation at number 7. Up next at number 6 is going to be Texas Chainsaw 3D, which came out in 2013. Are we gonna break 20% on the tomato meter score with this movie? Well, nope, we're not. This movie comes in at 19% in the tomato meter score and a 40% audience score. So, some people out there have some schlocky fun with this movie. The critics' consensus for 3D goes like this. As an ugly and cynical attempt to rebrand Leatherface as horror's anti-hero, Texas Chainsaw 3D is a bold move for the franchise. I mean, bold in some ways, I guess you could say. Yeah, I mean, they do take a swing with that whole aspect, which is kind of interesting. This movie can be so ridiculous that it can be kind of fun at times. There's some moments where I have a good time with it. Do your thing, cuz obviously everybody talks about that, which to me is kind of hilarious. And of course, the whole moment where the guy gets pushed into the mayor goes into the meat grinder, the CGI is god awful in that moment, but it's hilarious in a lot of ways. So I have some fun with that. I do enjoy how at the beginning of the movie they recreate the slaughterhouse, and I think they do a good job with that. It looks very similar to the original, even though I'm asking myself while I'm watching that moment in the beginning of the movie, like, who the hell are all these people? What? Like, what's going on here? That's a kind of weird thing in the movie. But also, Heather's character at the end of the movie just completely flips, just like that. I mean, all of her friends were just brutally murdered, including her boyfriend, who's also a piece of shit, but still. And then she just flips and she's like, you know what? Forget all that. I'm on Team Leatherface. I'll babysit this old-ass stanky dude in the basement for the rest of my life, for the rest of his life. That sounds great. That aspect of 3D is weird, but you can laugh at it too. But of course, in this movie, they try to convince you that Leatherface is actually just a poor old victim. He's now kind of the hero of the story. He's kind of saving the day because Mayor Burt Hartman and just the Hartmans in general, those are the true bad guys in this story. And I mean, that's hard to believe. That's a stretch to say the least. I mean, to me, it's a dumb subplot, not done well or pulled off well. But other than that, I mean, I can have some fun with 3D on occasion. Is it a movie I will make an effort to go and watch? No, not at all. But I would kind of disagree though, because on my personal ranking list, I have 3D at number 7. They have it at number 6. So I would disagree with that, but there you go. Number 6, Texas Chainsaw 3D. Moving into the top 5, up next is going to be Leatherface from 2017 with a 27% tomato meter score and a 23% audience score. Pretty damn low. The critics' consensus for Leatherface goes like this. Leatherface may wear the skin of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre prequel, but it proves gutless as an origin story and finds little invention in the horror tropes it's cannibalizing. So Leatherface is kind of an interesting one because if you're watching through the whole kind of franchise, Leatherface comes in later in the franchise, of course, 2017, and it's kind of new and fresh in a way. So like if you've been binging the franchise and it's kind of same old, and then you're like, oh, this is kind of a little bit new and unique. That's interesting. So that is a plus if you're watching through the franchise. But if you're just watching this movie on its own, it's not great by any means. So this movie is essentially a prequel to the 1974 movie and to 3D, I guess. In this movie, we follow this group of kids, this group of people on this like road trip after breaking out of the mental institution. So that's kind of fun. You're not just stuck in the slaughterhouse. You're not just stuck in a barn. You're not just stuck in a meat factory. You're like moving from location to location, and while they're being chased by the police. This movie is bloody. I mean, we get some kills in this movie, which I enjoy. It's got the second most deaths in the franchise at 21. One thing that's interesting about this movie is the most brutal people in this movie are without a doubt Ike and Clarice, like this couple that also escaped from the mental institution that has these kids hostage in a way. But yeah, Ike and Clarice are just batshit crazy. They will kill anyone at any time. They do not care. So following them is crazy and unhinged and wild and kind of a good time here and there. But yeah, so this movie also introduces very similar, you could say, to like Rob Zombie's Halloween. It's kind of like Leatherface wasn't born this way necessarily. He's more of just a product of his environment, a product of his family. So that aspect of it is okay, but definitely this is like a smaller Leatherface. This is the least scary Leatherface. They try to trick you a little bit, having like the bigger kid, you know, almost kind of seeming like, oh, that's going to be Leatherface, but you can kind of see it from a mile away that it's going to be somebody else. So yeah, I mean, they have the balls at the end of this movie to chop the final girl's head off, which is a good time. But yeah, Leatherface from 2017. Do I agree with this being at number 5, middle of the road for the franchise? Yeah, I do agree. I have this movie at number 5 on my personal list. Yeah, there you go. Leatherface from 2017 coming in at number 5. Moving right along to number 4 is going to be Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2022 with a 30% tomato meter score and a 25% audience score. I mean, we're at number 4 and these scores have barely budged. This is brutal. Rotten Tomatoes is massacring this franchise with these scores, damn. But anyways, the critics' consensus for the newest TCM movie goes like this. Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't skimp on the gore, but Leatherface may have irrevocably lost his ability to terrify. Because it's a newer movie, it also has the audience consensus, which I'll read. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is gory, but it isn't very scary. And it definitely doesn't help that the story hardly makes any sense. So this movie is set about 50 years or so after the original. It's kind of like Halloween 2018. They bring back the final girl. She's like traumatized. She's been preparing for Leatherface. Sally, of course, very much like a copy of Halloween 2018 in a lot of ways, you know what I mean? But way worse. And also an older Leatherface, so similar to Michael Myers in Halloween 2018. You know, an older Leatherface who's been through some shit and he's kind of in a different phase of his life. But I will say in this movie, the characters overall, the victims, you could say, are terrible. They're not likable at all. These kids are like social media influencers who are trying to start this like utopian society in some like abandoned ghost town in Texas. I will say though, kind of like they said in the critics' consensus, doesn't skimp on the gore, and it doesn't skimp on the gore. I mean, there's a lot of blood, guts, and gore in this movie. The scene in the like the police van, I mean, you knew the dude had something coming. In the back of the van, Leatherface breaks the guy's arm in half, gives him a compound fracture, and then stabs his own bone through his neck. That's a cool scene. I enjoy that. Of course, in this movie, you've got like the big bus scene, right? Where it's kind of like under this bluish light. There's all these people on the bus, and everybody's taking a video like, oh shit, look at this guy, you know, trying to play off of what people do nowadays, living their life through their phone. One of the guys is even like, you're gonna get canceled, bro. And then the lady from the bank towards the end of that scene gets sliced in half. That's kind of a cool, the way it's shot. It's kind of interesting and definitely gory, like I said. But I will say, I mean, you're gonna bring back not one of the best final girls in the genre, but one of the most important final girls in all of horror history, Sally. You're gonna bring her back just to use her like that? She's very underutilized, in my opinion, in this movie. Nowhere near like how Laurie Strode was utilized in Halloween 2018, but very underutilized, and then she just gets killed in kind of an unceremonious way. But I will say with 2022, when I have watched this movie in the past, you know, I'm not completely bored watching the movie. There are some fun moments. I actually do agree with this movie being number 4. It's number 4 on my personal list. It's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We want to see Leatherface do some shit with the chainsaw, and he does in this movie. So there you go. I would agree with it being number 4. So yeah, number 4, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022. All right, coming in at number 3 is going to be The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2003. With a 37% tomato meter score and a 58% audience score. So when I saw that score, I thought that was pretty low. I was actually pretty surprised about this score, but we'll get into all of that. The critics' consensus for the 2003 movie goes a little something like this. An unnecessary remake that's more gory and less scary than the original. Yes, definitely more gory than the original, which is surprisingly not that gory of a movie. Less scary than the original. Yes, I mean, all those things are accurate, but that's a very generic consensus. I mean, like a lot of them are, but that's about as generic as you can get. So that doesn't mean the movie doesn't have like a lot of positives. So I'm just going to say right off the bat, I disagree with this movie being at number 3. This movie is actually number 1 in the franchise for me. Not because it's the most iconic, not because it's the most important movie in the franchise, No, none of that stuff. You guys have heard me talk about this before. When I make rankings lists, it usually comes down to which movies I have the most fun with, which movies have the most rewatchability for me. And the 2003 movie has by far the most rewatchability in the entire franchise for me. So here's some reasons why I enjoy this movie. So this movie has, in my opinion, the best final girl in the franchise. Erin, Jessica Biel playing that character. She does a great job. She's just a badass, and also like is somebody who's likable, somebody you root for in the story, I think. And yeah, I like her a lot. Also in this movie, it looks great. This is one of those Platinum Dunes movies. Once again, looks great. Technically, it's shot very well. I think the script is okay. They brought back the, Daniel Pearl, the cinematographer from the original, also the cinematographer on the Friday the 13th movie from 2009. Makes the movie look great. We get introduced to R. Lee Ermey's character. And this is, out of the two movies that R. Lee Ermey is in, I think he's the best in this movie. He's very sinister and kind of scary. And you're just like, damn, this guy is messed up. I also really like that we go to the slaughterhouse at the end of the movie. Not something you surprisingly ever see really in this franchise. So I like that. We go to the slaughterhouse. We get that big scene, that kind of cat and mouse game between Erin and Leatherface. Which Erin ends up like wrecking shit on Leatherface, cuts his arm off. So that's cool. Love that. I also really like this Leatherface, this Andrew Brzezinski Leatherface, this big, menacing, like pro wrestler Leatherface in a way. You know what I mean? He's scary. He's brutal. He doesn't give a shit. It's great Leatherface. I think this movie does a really good job, which is very rare in this franchise, of mixing fun with house just being scary too. Like, I think the characters and the chemistry between the characters, Erin's friends, are fun, kind of funny here and there, and it feels very much like a 2003 movie. So I enjoy that. Like I said, is this movie as iconic as the original, as important as the original? No, by no means whatsoever. But I disagree with it being number 3 on this list. I would have it number 1. So there you go. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2003 coming in at number 3. Okay, coming in at number 2 is going to be The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 from 1986 with a 50% tomato meter score and a 46% audience score. So 13% higher on the tomato meter than the 2003 movie, which is surprising to me. But the 2003 movie has a 12% higher audience score. So the audience likes that movie obviously a lot more, quite a bit more than this movie. But the critics' consensus for Part 2 goes like this. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 shocks with a gonzo blend of over-the-top humor and gore, but without the tense atmosphere of its predecessor. The stakes feel lower. And yeah, I would agree with that, but that's what they were going for with this movie. They were not trying to make it more intense than the original. Tobe Hooper probably knew, like, I'm not going to be able to make it more unsettling and scarier than the original. That's just probably not going to happen. So let's do something new. This movie is purposely a comedy, and they lean into that, which I appreciate. I like that. They just go all in with that aspect. I would say this is the most unique tone in the entire franchise. There's some ridiculousness in this movie, and it's pretty funny at times. For a Part 2 in this franchise, I wish they would have just picked up right after the events of the original. Would it have been, like I said, scarier or more unsettling than the original? Most likely no. But I personally would have really enjoyed that. Kind of like Halloween 2, the original. Would have loved that. But we do get my second favorite final girl in the franchise in this movie, Stretch. Love Stretch. I think she does a great job in this movie. Very likable. Somebody you root for, without a doubt. I like her chemistry with Dennis Hopper's character, Lefty. I think they're kind of funny together. But yeah, Dennis Hopper's fun in this movie too, as kind of this like ex-Texas Ranger who's sort of gone rogue in a way. Kind of fun aspect to it. This movie, of course, like just to kick up the schlockiness to another level, this movie brings in Chop Top, who is completely absurd in every sense of the word. But you can laugh at him. It's kind of funny at times. But yeah, I do like that they bring back Jim Cito. That's a plus for this movie. The cook, he does a good job in this movie, is definitely one of the main characters and is pretty fun in this movie, definitely. But, of course, this movie is nowhere near as scary as some of the movies on this list, especially the original. Nowhere near as iconic. I mean, the Leatherface in this movie is nowhere near as good as the original, nowhere near as good as even Andrew Brzezinski's. And the Leatherface in this movie is just pretty generic. But yeah, surprisingly, this movie has a decent amount of gore for being a comedy, which is cool. Like, that's fun, especially, you know, when Buzz and Rick, the guys earlier who are calling into the radio station, get slaughtered. The first guy does, at least. The second guy we don't get to see. But the first guy, that's the bloodiest moment in the movie. I think Tom Savini worked on that kill too, which is a cool kill. But yeah, part 2, I disagree. I would have it number 3 on my list. So not a huge problem with it being number 2. It is one of the more rewatchable movies in the franchise for me. So yeah, there you go. Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 coming in at number 2. All right, and at number 1, of course, is going to be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original from 1974. Certified fresh with an 89% in the tomato meter score and an 82% audience score. So clearly, nobody has been able to make a movie in this franchise that come even close critically to the original. So this movie obviously considered one of the most iconic horror movies ever. But the critics' consensus for the original goes like this. Thanks to a smart script and documentary-style camera work, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre achieves start-to-finish suspense, making it a classic in low-budget exploitation cinema. Definitely, without a doubt. I mean, the documentary style that they went with, I would say, you know, one of the biggest reasons probably, I mean, I wasn't alive in 74, but I would assume one of the biggest reasons why this movie has made, you know, over $100 million. Who knows what it has made? And a part of that has to do because this movie was sold to the mafia at one point in its whole process. So essentially everybody from the movie made pennies. But, you know, clearly by a mile, the most unsettling, uncomfortable, disgusting, scariest movie in this franchise. One of the most unsettling movies in horror history. You know, I mean, there's so many things in this movie that are iconic. Of course, the iconic ass shot. Kirk's death, iconic. The first death of the movie, getting killed very much like, you know, cattle. Bashed over the head. We get introduced to this person, this big ass dude, Leatherface, for the first time with a scary ass mask, you know, and then the iconic metal door slam. And it just makes you, it seems so like gritty and scary. Like there are really people like this out in the deep depths of Texas somewhere. Like that's what they're trying to make you feel. You know what I mean? If your car breaks down, you need to get some gas or some food. Be careful. Don't knock on the wrong door because this could actually happen. So yeah, I mean, this is the scariest Leatherface in the franchise. Love how Gunnar Hansen portrays Leatherface. Yeah, it's just horrifying. It's unsettling, you know? And Leatherface is that perfect blend of, it doesn't lean too much into the horrific, scary side and doesn't lean too much into like the silly side. It's that perfect blend of like this giant man-child who's very unpredictable. But I will say, like in this movie, the final girl is Sally. I've kind of talked about this a little bit. Not my favorite final girl in the franchise. She kind of just survives till the end in a way. Like, yeah, she's very resilient, but just kind of survives. But an important final girl in the genre, without a doubt. But yeah, the look and the feel of this movie, incredible. The grittiness, of course, the movie X by Ty West, you know, went for that type of style. There's been so many movies who have tried to go after this type of a look and a style, and it's so hard to replicate. But I will say, to wrap things up on the original, that overall the characters in this movie are not what shines. The Slaughter family's great, but the other characters, the victims, are just bags of meat. You don't get any backstory on them. They're all pretty bad, but the other stuff outshines that, definitely. But yeah, the original Texas Chainsaw from 74, one of the most important horror movies in history. A lot of people have this as their favorite horror movie of all time. Like I said earlier, though, I do have this movie as number 2 on my list, just because the rewatchability is so much lower than the 2003 remake. But a classic, very important movie. No problem with it being number 1 on the list. But anyways, everybody, there you go. That is how Rotten Tomatoes ranks the entire The Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Let me know down in the comments down below how you would rank this franchise. If you agree with this list, do you disagree with this list? If you want some more videos from me right now, go ahead and check out one of these next to me. Make sure you subscribe, though, so you don't miss any future videos coming up soon. But thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I will talk to you all in the next one.